to see some long grasses at different places on the battlefield. That's not because we run out of money. It's because there's like a meadow larks and some birds out there that eat that habitat. And they're losing that habitat, so we're trying to. All right. So now the British, they were rushing to finish their defensive positions all the way around Yorktown. And you see it's no small feat. And meanwhile, Washington had to march that American and French army down here from New York. And he had to get around New York City the whole time pulling Clinton and the British there, and he was going to attack them. And Washington did this brilliantly. First of all, he didn't let any of his enlisted soldiers and hardly any of his officers know that he was actually marching them down here to Yorktown. As far as they were concerned, they thought they were getting ready to attack New York City. Now, Washington did this for quite a few reasons, but the main reason being, of course, he didn't want word leaking out to the British of his true intentions. Also, Washington sent out a bunch of messengers on horseback with absolutely fake messages. So much for him and that cherry tree legend. Okay? He hoped the British would capture some of them. They did. They're like, oh, we got great intelligence here. It looks like New York's the target. And the French army used the age-old tactic of setting up fake encampments around New York City. And all this worked. It thoroughly convinced the British General Clinton that an attack on New York City was imminent. So the American and the French army, they crossed the Hudson north of New York City. They marched down along the side of it, and they got to the point either they're going to turn to attack New York or keep going down south. And of course, Washington kept marching that army down south, and his own troops were like, whoa, we're going to Yorktown. They were shocked. But unfortunately for Clinton, he was so fooled that Washington was going to attack New York City that he didn't realize Washington had marched his armies down south until it was too late. And by the time he figured it out, Washington had managed to get those armies too far away for Clinton to be able to do anything immediately about it, except for maybe wave bye-bye. So Washington marched those armies down through New Jersey, down through Philadelphia, and on the other side of Philadelphia, Washington received the incredible good news that the French fleet had actually managed to get control of the Chesapeake Bay. Now think about that. Washington left New York City without even knowing if one of the most critical parts. No. Can you get them away from there, please? Thank you. Washington left New York City without even knowing if one of the most critical parts of the plan was even going to succeed. This is how risky his plan was. So when Washington got this incredible good news about the French fleet, Washington, who always carried himself with dignity and self-control whenever he's out in public, it's very important to him to a fault to appear in control. So when he got this incredible good news about the French fleet, Washington just lost it. He started jumping up and down, shouting for joy, stomping around, waving the message. I mean, his officers thought he had lost his mind. They had never seen Washington behave like that. But apparently Washington couldn't help it. Because with that news of the success of the French fleet, Washington realized for the first time that his very risky plan might actually have some chance of working, and apparently he was overjoyed by it. Now a lot of people will ask, why did Cornwallis just stay in Yorktown? I mean, he knew the French fleet got control of Chesapeake, and by now he knew there was this big army marching down here. Why did he just stay here? Well, Cornwallis had made a breakout plan. He had finalized one. He was getting ready to make a punch-out escape through Lafayette, small army, before Lafayette got any more reinforcements. It had been a risky move. But right when he was seriously thinking about doing it, he started getting all these messages from his commander in New York, Clinton. Guys, I'm sorry, it's a big distraction. You do it in the back there. Yeah. Even more so than the music. He started getting all these messages from Clinton. And Clinton sent a message basically saying, look, don't worry, I'm on my way to rescue you. I'm going to have the British Navy with me. I'm going to have at least 5,000 British troops on board, and we're going to be there any day to relieve you. And he kept sending Cornwallis those reassurances. So Cornwallis is like, okay, help's on the way. He still had faith in the British Navy. So he thought help was coming fairly quickly. So he decided it was best to stay. So he stayed. Now the American and the French army, they marched down to the top of the Chesapeake Bay, And it's there most of those troops and supplies started embarking on ships, boats, and barges. Thank you, French Navy. They were going to end up sailing all the way down the Chesapeake Bay, into the James River and up the James River on the other side of the peninsula. They were going to offload around the Jamestown area, and then they were going to march into Williamsburg. Well, this was going to take a little while. So George Washington took this opportunity to ride over to his home in Northern Virginia at Mount Vernon. Now, George Washington had not been home for over 6 years. So he took General Rochambeau. They only spent a couple of days at Mount Vernon. Then they rode on horseback all the way down to Williamsburg. They had a reunion with Lafayette, and they awaited the arrival of all the troops. All the troops arrived in Williamsburg on September the 26th. Now, from the point that they left New York to the point that they all arrived in Williamsburg took just under 6 weeks. Now, it was an incredible logistical feat pulled off here, but Washington wasted no time. 2 days later, he had to march out of Williamsburg 13 miles away. They marched here, arriving the same day, September the 28th, and they started encircling Yorktown, setting up encampments about a mile beyond that modern-day tree line. And they started immediately getting everything ready to dig their own siege lines. But they were finally ready, and they decided to dig the first siege line on the night of October the 6th. Now, you were going to have 1,500 French and American soldiers with picks and shovels digging. You were going to be making a lot of noise. And somehow the Americans and the French wanted to dig that first siege line without the British here knowing they're out there digging, because if they did, they'd fire everything they could at them and probably kill a lot of them. That's not good. So there's times throughout history where weather will play a critical role. It happens a lot, folks. And a lot of times weather works against you, and a lot of times weather works for you. I have to deal with it every day. Washington had to go both ways all the time. But weather played a critical part here a few times. And one of the times was with the digging of that first siege line. It had been beautiful weather here. But on October the 5th, it began to rain quite heavily. And it continued to rain into October the 6th, and then into the night of October the 6th. And what that rain did, the clouds covered the moon, which was bright enough to have been a factor in the nighttime dig. Second, the rain made the ground easier to dig. And third, it rained hard enough where it helped to mute the sound of all those tools while they were out there digging. So on the night of October 6th, they snuck up to dig, and they were scared. And they started digging that first siege line as quickly as they could, and they basically completed it in one night, and the British never knew they were out there doing it. So when the British looked out at first sight, suddenly saw a siege line in front of them, they must have did some sort of collective golf. They knew they were in trouble. Now today, you can only see a small section of where that first siege line was. But if you look at the most distant tree line just over in this area, and you have trees halfway between you and it kind of blocking your view, but right in front of that most distant tree line, hopefully you can make out a small section, a raised strip of earth with a white French flag on it. That's just a small part of where that first siege line was. They would have began digging it over here. They would not have needed to dig anything on the other side of Yorktown because there's a natural barrier, deep ravine. The French built some more positions right on the York River across the modern-day Victory Center. But that main siege line would have started there. It would have stretched well beyond that modern-day tree line. And believe me, none of those trees were there back then. It was wide open. It stretched all the way over to the York River on this side, about 850 yards away. The French had this half, the Americans had this half. And they perfected it, strengthened it, moved that incredibly heavy artillery up, and they were ready to begin firing on October the 9th. So at 3 p.m. on October the 9th, the French were the first to open fire into Yorktown from this far left position. The last one first. Within 2 hours later, George Washington himself lit the first American cannon from the far right position. And it is said, notice how I'm saying that, it is said that the cannonball George Washington fired, that it went into Yorktown, crashed through a couple of buildings, went into a building where some British officers were still trying to eat above ground, and it killed Cornwallis's commissary general and severely wounded an officer with him. And from that point on, the Americans and the French just bombarded Yorktown. It was going to be an intense bombardment, non-stop, 24/7, averaging 1,700 cannonballs and mortar shells a day. sometimes of the day much more intense than others, and that was not including what the British were managing to fire back. And we're out here, other than pipe bands and airplanes and traffic, it's usually pretty peaceful out here. But back then, they described the intensity of bombardments was so much, they said it was as if the whole peninsula was shaking from the thunder of those cannons. And one American doctor described how at night you see the mortar shells raining down on Yorktown. He said it was like a meteor shower. It must have been an incredible sight, but it must have been horrible for anybody in Yorktown. But even from that range, the Americans and the French knocked out some British cannons, and they quickly felt like, you know what? We could move up even closer. So like a boa constrictor, they wanted to put the squeeze on Cornwallis. So on the night of October 11th, this siege went quickly. They decided, I was wrong, they decided to take a second siege line 400 yards closer. And if you look across the battlefield, you'll see an American flag, and you'll see a half mast. It's not supposed to be today, but, and in front of the house. Now that's a national cemetery. There was Civil War activity all around here. I'm not going into that. Don't worry. There's information inside. So there are a lot of unknown soldiers buried there, particularly Union, sometimes 2 to 3 to even 4 to a grave. Then you have these earthworks with a white French flag. More earthworks, another white French flag. More earthworks are harder to see, but there's 2 American flags over here. That's where the second siege line was. And again, they dug it at night. They launched diversion attacks. The British seemed to fire everywhere except they were actually digging. And again, they got it done in one night. They moved the cannons 400 yards closer, and they started pounding Yorktown even harder. But there were 2 British defensive positions that stood in the way of them being able to complete that second siege line. And they're known as redoubts. And if you look across there, you see people walking on top of redoubt number 9. And then beyond a large oak would be redoubt number 10. And a redoubt is a heavily defended earthen fort. And the British soldiers and their allies inside of them defending them were the hardcore soldiers. And the Americans and the French had to capture them. So the night of October 14th, 400 of the best French troops were going to try to overrun redoubt number 9, and 400 of the best American troops were going to try to overrun redoubt number 10. And the American troops were made up of white, black, and Native American troops. And you did not get picked to attack redoubt 10 unless you were the elite best of the very best. And they were told that they were going to attack redoubt 10 with unloaded muskets just with fixed bayonets. And they weren't happy about that. They didn't want them accidentally shooting each other in the confusion of a nighttime attack. And they were commanded by that gentleman on your $10 bill. Everybody say at once who he is.
Hamilton.
Thank you, 3 people. And did I hear someone with an accent say it? No. Okay. Alexander Hamilton, most of you didn't know that. Future Secretary, Treasurer under Washington, Major League ended up with the federal type government. So the man on your $10 bill commanded the attack on redoubt 10, which occurred in the 10th month of the year. And I can tell you, if I only had a fixed bayonet, I'd want to get that over with quickly. Apparently they did too. They got through the defenses. There was intense hand-to-hand combating casualties. But the Americans captured redoubt 10 in 10 minutes. So the man on your $10 bill commanded the attack on redoubt 10 in the 10th month of the year, which was captured in 10 minutes. 10, 10, 10, and 10. And Alexander Hamilton was placed on the $10 bill, not for that reason. Now, as days may be numbered on it, actually. Now, I'll give you 5 more minutes. Okay, I'll be done in 5 minutes. Now, the French had a much harder time capturing redoubt 9. They took loaded muskets. They paid a price. They had a hard time getting through. Once they did, it was dark. Uniforms looked alike. You know, your adrenaline's flowing. So they were accidentally shooting some of their own. So they had a lot more casualties, but they finally captured redoubt 9 in 30 minutes. 30 minutes of that type of fighting. So now Cornwallis was completely surrounded, and he did something no commanding officer ever wants to do, and I haven't quite got to surrender yet. He decided to leave behind his sick and wounded troops. And believe me, he had a lot that were particularly sick. He was going to try to take his troops that were able and try to sneak them across the York River by boat to join the 1,000 he had right across there at Gloucester Point. He was going to try to make a desperation attempt at a punch out at St. Lawrence. So on the night of the 16th, they started sneaking those troops across by boat, and they managed to get about 1,000 across. But again, weather intervened. A terrible storm came up, scattered and damaged the boat, and now Cornwallis could no longer escape. So for the sake of his troops, we cannot begin to imagine how horrible this bombardment must have been for him. Cornwallis now realized he had no choice but to offer to surrender. So in the morning of the 17th, a drummer came up on the earthworks beating for a parley with an officer beside him waving a handkerchief, and they were very brave because cannonballs were literally bouncing all over the place. And the Americans said that they had not seen the bright red jacket of that officer through all the very thick smoke. They would have never heard that drummer beating for a parley. But when they saw the officer's jacket, the Americans and the French silenced the cannons, and it got quiet for the first time in 8 days. And then they could hear that drummer beating for a parley, and the Americans said it was one of the most incredible sounds they ever heard. And Cornwallis sent a message pretty much saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that he would like a cessation of hostilities for 24 hours while he thought about things. And Washington wasn't about to give him that. He said, you tell him he has 2 hours. What's he going to do? And Cornwallis had no choice, so they sent commissioner officers over to the Morehouse, stop E on your battlefield drive, and they spent hours there trying to talk about the terms of surrender. But the British were expecting to get good terms, and the Americans were not about to let them have it. They said, no, you're going to get the same terms of surrender that you gave that American army at Charleston, South Carolina. You're going to march out with your flags down and furled. You're not playing the lively tunes. You're giving up your weapons, and you're all going to be taken as prisoners of war. Now, the British fought on that, but the Americans were not about to bend. So the British had to surrender under those terms, and they didn't like it very much. So on the day of surrender, October 19th, Cornwallis called in sick. He said he was sick, and he had his second in command, Brigadier General Charles O'Hara, lead the British and the German troops out of Yorktown to surrender. They marched out of Yorktown, heading down that road towards that national cemetery between part of the French and the American army. They got to right about where that national cemetery is today, and this is one of the reasons they put that cemetery there. They knew this happened on that ground. Because it's there the official sword surrendering took place. Washington and them were on their horses there. It was just a quick ceremony, and there's a painting of that on your brochure, and that painting's in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. There's a quick ceremony there, then the British and the German troops marched down to Surrender Field, laid down all their weapons, and thus the siege here ended. 5 days later, who was racing down the coast with the British Navy and 5,000 troops on board? Clinton and Almagray. But they got a message by boat saying, too late. Cornwallis has already surrendered at Yorktown, nearly 1/3 of the British forces in North America here. So all Almagraves and Clinton could do is turn that British fleet around with all those troops on board and go right back to New York City. They've been delayed by contrary winds and by Almagraves wanting that fleet repaired before he'd sail again. So, this was the last major battle of the American Revolution. Now, yes, there were very, very minor skirmishes that did occur after this, predominantly between American patriots and American loyalists. And by now, it had become a world war. You had Spain involved, France involved, the Netherlands involved. Seemed like everybody had something against Great Britain. So because of that, the peace treaty was going to be a very complex. It was going to take 2 years to negotiate and finalize, because those other nations still had to duke it out elsewhere. But this was the battle that won the American Revolution. And remember, just 6 months before this, George Washington had been in such desperation that he had written those words saying, we are at the end of our tether. We're getting ready to lose this war unless something very big happens. And within 6 months of Washington writing such desperate words, events remarkably aligned themselves for that something big happened here at Yorktown. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you are standing on very special grounds here today. You're standing on the ground where the likes of George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Lafayette, Cornwallis, where people from several different nations converged on this village of Yorktown to determine the fate of an independent America. And every year, we just did it. Every year on July 4th, what do Americans celebrate? And please do not say the 4th of July. What are we celebrating today? The
Independence Day.
signing of the Declaration of Independence, where in 1776, after 1 year of war, America officially declared its independence from Great Britain with a remarkable document, particularly that second paragraph that began with these famous words, saying, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Now, we know in America's history we have stumbled on that one. We have made horrendous mistakes. We've had incredible successes. And as a nation, we are still working out what those ideals are going to mean to us. But those would have just been beautiful words on a beautifully written piece of paper if what happened here had not happened. Because yes, in 1776, America declared its independence. But it was not until October 1781 that independence became real here in Yorktown. Now give me 15 more seconds. 1607, Great Britain set up that first permanent English colony in North America, Jamestown. And then 23 miles away, and 174 years later, Great Britain lost its 13 colonies right here at Yorktown. Here where you're standing today is where this nation won its independence, and you could say it truly was born. All right, I apologize about that. There was a schedule overlap, and I didn't really have any other options to take you anywhere unless you were in full sun. So, and it made me go long because when you have to project your voice, it extends the length of your cord, and it wipes you out. But it's my Friday. So. All right, so if you have any questions, certainly do ask. It was my pleasure. Enjoy your afternoon. You can drive the battlefield till sunset. I sure hope it's more than earthworks and cannons to you. Like I said, this is considered one of the most influential battles in world history. If you haven't seen the movie, one will start shortly. Yes?
If Cornwallis called in sick and his second in command surrendered, what happened to Cornwallis?
Cornwallis was taken as a prisoner of war, but quickly he was paroled because there was an American being held in the Tower of London. The only American do it. They wanted to try to trade him. They used Cornwallis to do that. But that never worked out. But Cornwallis, he went back to England, and he was blamed for this initially, but he got back into favor. He went to India. He set up that British system in India. He went to Ireland. Who's from Ireland here? Are they still here? They may have left me. So they went to Ireland. He was a governor of Ireland ruthlessly. And then he went back to India and died in Roughton's buried there. Clinton, his commander, lost command of his army, never got another command, got completely blamed.
Okay, Periscope 10.
Thank you.